There's a quiet truth that often goes unnoticed. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. But once you understand it, everything starts to shift. The moment you stop trying to control everything is the moment you begin to find real power. The moment you stop chasing is when you become magnetic. And when you finally let go of the need to be chosen, you realize you were never meant to compete in the first place. Most of us spend our lives trying to earn worth through performance, perfection, and being seen. But what if that effort is exactly what keeps us stuck? What if trying harder isn't the path to being valued, but the very thing that makes us invisible? This isn't about being distant. It's not about playing games. It's about learning to be anchored in a kind of inner calm that can't be shaken. The Stoics called it ataraxia, a peaceful self-command that doesn't need to prove anything. And that's what we're diving into today. Not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. Because if you're tired of overgiving, of being overlooked, of wondering why effort isn't enough, this might help you make sense of it all. If these reflections resonate with something deeper in you, if you're on a path toward growth, clarity, and truth, consider subscribing. It helps us grow this space for thoughtful minds like yours. And it quietly says, I'm doing this with intention. Most people think attention equals value. So they try harder. They respond quickly, give more, say yes often. They believe this is how to matter, by proving, always proving. But under it all, there's usually a hidden belief. If I stop trying, I'll be forgotten. That belief is where the exhaustion begins. Every time you reach too far just to be seen, what you're really saying is, my worth depends on you. And in doing so, you hand away your power. It doesn't matter how confident you look. People feel the energy underneath. If you need their validation to feel whole, they sense it, and the dynamic shifts. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But how can you become that version of yourself if you're constantly adjusting to fit what someone else might prefer? People aren't drawn to effort. They're drawn to energy, the grounded kind, the kind that doesn't chase, the quiet presence of someone who already knows their own value. Someone who isn't asking, "Do you see me?" but walks through the world as if to say, "How could you not?" That's not arrogance. That's self-possession. It's what Aristotle meant when he said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." When you live like you already matter, you stop performing and start embodying. People feel that, often before they understand it. But it takes something real to get there. It takes breaking old habits. It takes courage to stop measuring your worth by how others respond. And it takes stillness in a world that constantly pulls you toward motion. Too many people chase attention, not realizing they're trading depth for noise. But the ones who leave a mark, the ones who are remembered and respected, they don't chase. They just are, rooted, steady, whole. Plato said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power, and the truest power is internal. It's the strength to stay grounded, to let your silence say what words cannot, to move with intention and hold your space, even when no one's clapping. When you embody that, people don't just notice you, they feel you, and they respect you, not because you demanded it, but because you gave them no other option." The real shift doesn't happen when you get better at playing the game. It happens when you decide to stop playing it. When you stop auditioning for a role in someone else's story and start writing your own, that's when everything changes. There's something rare about a person who doesn't rush to be liked, who speaks with purpose and walks away without fear. That's presence, and presence is unforgettable. Socrates once said, "To find yourself, think for yourself." So what happens when you finally stop looking through someone else's lens? When you stop asking, what do they want from me? And start asking, what do I want to build around me? That's when alignment begins. That's when your life stops revolving around being chosen and starts becoming a reflection of the one who chooses themselves. And that's when everything shifts. When your world stops spinning around being chosen and starts aligning with your own inner peace. Here's the paradox. The moment you no longer need to be chosen, you often become the only choice that feels genuine. Because your energy says, I'm not waiting to be saved. I'm not seeking permission. I already know who I am. That's what creates gravity. Not the chase, not the constant effort, just the quiet assurance of someone who knows their worth and is willing to let the world catch up if it wants to. We don't chase what we already trust we have. It's not about being dismissive or indifferent. It's simply how the human mind works. When something feels completely available, predictable, our attention tends to drift. But when there's a little space, a bit of uncertainty, something we haven't quite figured out yet, we lean in, not out of manipulation, but because we're wired to explore what feels just out of reach. That's why trying to be understood too quickly can actually push people away. When we explain everything, reply instantly, overshare, when we overgive in the hope of being seen, we erase the very space where curiosity and depth can grow. We become familiar too fast. And what's familiar is often overlooked. Aristotle once said, "The more you know, the more you realize you don't know." The same is true of people. When someone carries themselves with quiet confidence, centered, composed, present, it invites curiosity. You want to know more, not because they demanded attention, but because they didn't. There's strength in stillness, not as a performance, not as a tactic, not in pretending to be distant, but as a natural byproduct of being whole. This isn't about manipulation. It's authenticity without pressure. It's the recognition that your energy says more than your words ever could, and trusting it to speak on your behalf. That's what I call intentional mystery. Not mystery built on withholding, but on depth, on not needing to constantly be visible or validated. The kind of person who's comfortable in silence and allows that silence to say something of value. Carl Jung once wrote, "Solitude is where one discovers one is not alone." When you're at peace in your own presence, you stop chasing noise. You stop needing to fill every moment with proof of your worth. You become selective, not out of superiority, but because your time, your attention, your energy, they matter. And when you know that, others begin to sense it too. It creates tension, not the kind that repels, but the kind that draws people in. Because in a world full of noise, stillness stands out. When you pause instead of rush, when you choose presence over performance, your words carry more weight. Your silences speak. You're no longer just part of the crowd. You're a presence that can't be overlooked. Plato once said, "Silence at the proper season is wisdom." There's something powerful about restraint, about not being everywhere, about being intentional with where and with whom you show up. It's not about being cold or unavailable. It's about self-respect, about not offering your presence as if it costs nothing. This kind of energy doesn't chase or demand. It doesn't need to be loud to be heard. It simply exists with clarity, calm, and conviction. And people feel it. They notice the way you move, the way you speak, the peace you carry. Not because you told them who you are, but because you live like you already know. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And maybe the examined life, the one rooted in stillness, intention, and quiet strength, is the one that truly leaves a mark. This also includes how we show up in relationships. If every connection feels like a constant effort to prove your worth, it might be time to pause and ask yourself, am I inviting real connection or just hoping to be chosen? Because once you start to believe your value is already whole, that you have nothing to prove and everything to protect, you stop giving your energy away in exchange for attention. You begin to hold it carefully, intentionally, like something precious. And that small shift, it changes everything. Mystery doesn't come from being confusing. It comes from being complete. You don't chase. You don't beg. You don't fill silence just to avoid discomfort. You let the quiet speak for itself. You let your stillness do the work. And what people feel in that stillness, that calm sense of self, is unforgettable. Here's something to consider. Could you walk away, not as a performance, not to get a reaction, but honestly, cleanly, if someone couldn't meet you where you are? Because that moment, when you realize you could leave and stay grounded, that's the beginning of your power. It's not about being distant or cold. It's about being clear. It's about honoring yourself enough to say, if this doesn't feel aligned, I won't force it. When you get to that place of clarity, you no longer sit in the role of the one waiting to be picked. You become the one who chooses. You observe. You evaluate. You decide. It's a quiet kind of authority, the kind that doesn't raise its voice or over-explain just to be understood. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But once you do, you stop negotiating your worth based on how others respond to you. You stop asking, 'Am I enough?' and start asking, 'Is this aligned with who I really am?' That shift in your inner dialogue, it's where presence is born. And true presence doesn't chase. It doesn't perform. It simply is. And people feel it. There's something rare about someone who isn't trying to prove anything, who's not overly polished or eager to please. They're just grounded, clear in their values, rooted in their own pace. That groundedness creates space. It invites curiosity, not discomfort, but intrigue. People start to wonder, what makes this person so steady? What do they know about themselves that I haven't yet learned? That kind of energy is magnetic, not because it's trying to be, but because it isn't trying at all. It doesn't shift to earn attention. It doesn't stretch itself to be liked. It stays still and lets the world adjust around it. Socrates once said, "Know thyself." And when you do, you stop outsourcing your worth. You stop chasing connection. You allow it. You don't fight to be seen. You trust that those meant for you will notice. This isn't detachment for the sake of appearing strong. It's self-respect. When you no longer need someone to validate your experience, you're free. You stop feeling anxious over mixed signals. You stop waiting to be recognized, because you already see your own value. And if someone doesn't, you walk, not to teach them a lesson, but because your peace matters more than their presence. That decision, it isn't dramatic, it's dignified. Plato once wrote, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." And often, the hardest thing to conquer is the impulse to cling, to potential, to what could be, to the hope that maybe someday they'll understand. But when you stop clinging, when you release the grip of fear disguised as love, what's left is clean. It's honest. It's real. You stop moving from need. You start moving from choice. And that feels completely different. It's lighter, stronger, quieter. What's truly magnetic is someone who knows they're already enough, with or without applause. Someone who doesn't chase moments because they trust the right ones will stay. Someone who doesn't rely on someone else's affection to feel whole, because that wholeness was never in question. And if someone can't meet your energy, your effort, your truth, that's not your failure. That's your filter. That's the clarity that protects your peace. So ask yourself again, could you walk away? If the answer is yes, not as a tactic, but as a truth, then you've already stepped into one of the rarest forms of power. You've chosen yourself. And when you truly choose yourself, you stop chasing anything that can't choose you back. Because the moment you stop fighting to be seen, you finally see yourself. And that's where everything begins. You don't need to be chosen, because you've become the one who chooses. And in that quiet confidence, you become unforgettable. This isn't about pretending to be unavailable. That kind of act is easy to spot. People can feel when your silence is forced, when your distance is part of a strategy. It doesn't feel strong. It feels staged. Real strength doesn't need to perform. True presence doesn't come from withholding. It comes from fullness. When your life feels meaningful, when your days are rich with purpose, your mind at peace, your energy steady, what you offer becomes rare. Not because you're trying to be rare, but because so few people live that way. When you're rooted in your own life, your values, your passions, your calm, sharing your energy becomes intentional. Not because you're proving anything, but because you've come to understand. Not everyone needs access to you. And that's okay. Once you really understand that, your presence begins to carry more weight. It's not something anyone can simply reach for. It's something that's earned. Earned through respect, alignment, and genuine effort. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. When you live by what matters to you, when you make choices that protect your peace, your energy becomes more selective, not out of arrogance, but out of self-respect. You don't offer yourself just because someone asked. You offer your time, your care, your presence, when someone shows, through actions, not words, that they can hold it well. That subtle shift in how you move through the world, people feel it. Immediately, they begin to approach you differently, because they sense your boundaries aren't suggestions. They're a reflection of how deeply you've come to value your own life. And here's what's interesting. The right people will rise to meet that energy. The rest will fall away. Neither is a loss. Both are clarity. And clarity brings peace. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." But when your own life is full, when you're in tune with yourself, you stop fearing the quiet that sometimes comes when people walk away. Because your sense of peace? It's not tied to who stays. It's rooted in who you are. That kind of inner wholeness can't be faked. It can't be performed. And yet, it speaks louder than any words. Not in a loud way, not demanding, just quietly undeniable. You no longer give your attention out of habit or loneliness. You don't fill your space just to fill a void. You build a life that feels good from the inside, and that makes your presence something people notice, something they remember. You go from being one of many to being a standard, not through effort, but through alignment. Socrates said, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." And that's what this is. Not resistance, not games, just creation. You're not making yourself unavailable. You're simply becoming unavailable to anything that doesn't belong in the life you're building. That's not punishment. It's discernment. When your life is already meaningful, people who add to it feel expansive, like growth. And those who drain it? You'll feel that too, and you'll act on it, because you've stopped confusing chaos with love. At its heart, this isn't about scarcity. It's about self-respect. A deep, quiet commitment to living in a way that honors who you are. And from that place, any space you give someone isn't a request for approval. It's a privilege. Those who get it will treat it as such. Those who don't, they were never meant to stay. When they pull back, when their replies slow down, most people panic. They overthink. They follow up. They reach out again. trying to reclaim attention, trying to ease that quiet fear. What if I'm being ignored? But not you. You stay steady. You don't spiral into proving or pushing, not because you don't care, but because your self-worth doesn't depend on the speed of someone else's reply. You've done the inner work. You've built the kind of strength that doesn't rely on someone else's recognition to stay intact. And so, you wait, not from pride, but from peace. There's something different about that energy. People feel it. They notice the absence of pressure, the calm, the stillness, and they start to wonder, why aren't you chasing? Why aren't you trying harder? That curiosity changes the dynamic, because while they're still reacting, you're just being. And that kind of being, quiet, certain, unapologetic, is far more powerful than any performance. It's the difference between needing attention and naturally commanding it, between seeking a reaction and choosing peace. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." But as adults, we often carry a different burden when we place on our own shoulders the weight of the life we refuse to fully claim. A life where our responses are shaped not by clarity or choice, but by fear, by unhealed wounds, and by the silent hunger to be chosen. But something changes the moment we release that weight. When you stop needing validation, when you stop living on emotional survival mode, you begin to live with intention. There's nothing more magnetic than a person who is no longer ruled by impulse, someone who doesn't over-explain, who doesn't overreact, who doesn't overextend. They move in rhythm with themselves. They protect their peace without apology. And that kind of quiet confidence, it unsettles in ways desperation never could. You stop performing. You start embodying. You stop making noise. You start creating standards. You no longer chase acceptance. You become the one who chooses. When someone's energy shifts, you don't spiral. You observe. You allow people to reveal themselves. And in doing so, you protect what matters most, your peace. Plato once said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." And one of the greatest powers you'll ever hold is the ability to stay grounded when your ego wants to panic. To remain calm when everything around you pulls toward chaos. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's self-control in its most dignified form. And here's the truth. When you stop reacting, people start responding. Not to the silence itself, but to what the silence implies. That you are no longer moved by things that once had the power to undo you. That your worth is no longer up for negotiation. This isn't a tactic. It's a transformation. You're not here to beg. You're not here to chase. You're here to live from a place so whole, so rooted, that nothing external can make you question who you are. Socrates said, "He who is not content with what he has would not be content with what he would like to have." Contentment isn't complacency, it's sovereignty. It's the quiet confidence that your peace is not for sale. Your energy is not a trophy to be earned. It's a gift reserved for those who can handle it with care. So when the reply is slow, when the interest fades, you don't flinch, you don't fold, you continue, because your life, your wholeness, is not waiting for permission to be lived. Your worth has never been defined by how quickly someone replied. It's measured by how deeply you remain rooted when they didn't. Let that settle for a moment. Because the instant you need someone to choose you, you've already surrendered something sacred. Your power. Not the loud kind, the quiet, steady kind. The kind that comes from knowing you're whole, with or without anyone's approval. The moment your peace starts depending on another person's decision, your center shifts. You move from grounded to grasping, from standing tall to leaning too far in. Most don't notice when it happens, not until they feel the ache, that inner imbalance that whispers, "You gave too much of yourself away." But when your joy is internal, when your purpose, your clarity, your peace come from within, you stop needing anyone to complete you. Because you're not waiting to be rescued. You're not hoping to be chosen. You're simply living a life that's already full. So when someone enters that space, it's not because you're reaching, it's because you're inviting, not to impress, but to share what's already meaningful. You're not shrinking to fit. You're not chasing attention. You're just calm, certain, present. And that presence, it unsettles, in the best way. Because most people are used to need, subtle or overt, loud or quiet, some form of reaching. But when you don't reach, when you simply exist as someone already complete, it disrupts their pattern. They're used to being needed, not being truly seen. There's a profound difference. Need says, "I can't be whole unless you stay." Being seen says, "I already am whole, and I hope you're someone who sees that." It's not dramatic. It's not demanding. It's just true. And in that truth, you create space. Not the kind that feels like distance, but the kind that feels like respect, like dignity. You know your energy isn't something to be earned through effort or approval. It's a privilege, not a transaction. And you offer it only when there's alignment, when presence meets presence, not pretense. Plato wrote, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." And this is what that looks like in real life. You stop operating from a need to be chosen and start living from a place where being chosen is a gift, not a requirement. People will come, people will go, but the core of who you are remains steady because you've already claimed yourself, and that changes everything. When you no longer need someone to make you feel worthy, you show up differently. You don't try to prove, you just are. That quiet certainty draws the right people in. Not the ones who want performance, but the ones who recognize presence, because they've built it too. Socrates said, "Be as you wish to seem." So instead of performing confidence, you live it. Instead of pretending you're okay, you actually are. And that's what makes people stop and notice. Not because you're loud, but because your silence says everything. In a world full of noise, stillness is rare. Wholeness is rare. But people can feel it. They feel the difference between being pulled into someone's insecurity and being invited into their peace. So no, you don't need to chase. You don't need to wonder, did they notice me? The real question is, did I stay true to myself? Because when you do, the right people always notice. Not because they're told to, but because they can't help but feel it. In the end, it's simple. When you no longer need to be chosen, you become impossible to overlook. Thank you for spending this moment here, for thinking deeper, and for being part of Stoic Mindset Mastery. If this spoke to something inside you, there's more waiting. Watch the next video on your screen. It might be exactly what your spirit needs today. Until next time, stay grounded, stay whole, and remember, the quietest presence often leaves the loudest echo.